On Flag Day. Yes, it is Flag. A lot of flags out there these days, but the good old Stars and Stripes, my favorite, so enjoy Flag Day there. I got the stripes. The stars are the folks behind the scenes here at Law and Crime. Producer Heather in the chair today, so I suggest we get right to it. We are bringing you the Norfolk County, Massachusetts case. This is day 25 in the prosecution against defendant Karen Reed. It was dramatic, quite the start today. But just in case you've been in a cave for a while, you're new to the case, she's accused of killing her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, in January 2022. After the couple got into an argument, prosecution says Reed backed her SUV into the victim and then left him to die in a snowbank outside the home of fellow officer Brian Albert. On the other hand, Reed's defense team believes she is being framed in a massive cover-up orchestrated by both witnesses and law enforcement. Reed looking at charges for second-degree murder, vehicular manslaughter, while intoxicated and leaving the scene of a collision. If convicted, she faces life in prison. Now, Friday morning began with the camera being shut off after a juror issue kind of surfaced inside the courtroom. We received reports that the judge took jurors up one by one to question them, though it's kind of unclear what the issue actually was that was being addressed. Nonetheless, a female juror was dismissed for the famous, quote, personal reasons, end quote. With that ordeal came a different view of the courtroom following the cameras being shut off. So the judge eventually giving the media permission to continue streaming the trial from their Zoom view. So that's what you're going to see. So far, only one witness has been called to testify. Digital forensics examiner Jessica Hyde. She's asked to look over the timelines from very specific Google searches related to the case, including the famous Jennifer McCabe 2 Google searches on how long one to die in the cold. This was either at 2:27 or was it at 6:22? That's the question. And Hyde said that 2:27 a.m. timestamp doesn't necessarily reflect when that search was made, but the tab was open at that time. And the search could have been made at a different time, perhaps 6:22 a.m. That's, in this witness's belief, the valid time. So keep in mind, that's the time McCabe said that the defendant grabbed her phone and then made that search. So very important time frame here. We're going to talk all about it. And the jury's going to have to figure out what, if anything, this all means. Meantime, though, let's see where Hyde's testimony is headed now. Let's go back into the courtroom.
Doesn't pertain to this. However, those would be truly deleted items. So there's other places where we would expect potential recovery, not necessary in this instance. And you can have something that's in a WAL file and deleted without being in those other locations. Just stating that its existence in the WAL file itself doesn't mean deletion. But there are other SQLite things that would clearly indicate deletion that aren't applicable to this particular search.
Now, Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could ask Ms. Gilman to publish figure 1 from Ms. Hyde's report.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And again, Ms. Hyde, you recognize what's up on the screen?
Yes, this is figure 1. This is a direct screen capture from Sanderson's tool from the browser StateDB, limited to the Haas long to die in cold search.
If you could, using that laser pointer, again, direct the jury's attention to what, if anything, significant sort of notes that you observed in using the Sanderson tool that's depicted in figure 1.
Absolutely. So all of these searches are the exact same term. And here we have the order index. And here we have that last view time. And by looking at the last view time, which is the raw title of that artifact for the timestamp we were looking at, these are identical. This and more importantly are even the actual UUID for these are identical, which is right here. Now the offsets are different, and what that means is that this is just appearing several times in the write-ahead log. It has moved, as the database has moved data, through the write-ahead log to different positions, but has in every instance the same unique identifier, meaning that all of these entries are the same entry, just shown multiple times in the same database.
And to that point, as far as the multiple times that it's listed within there, what, if any, relationship does that have to how many times it was actually searched by a user?
Well, that UID shows that in this particular instance that it existed once in the last time in the tab, because this artifact, it does not tell us how many times something was searched by the user. This artifact is limited just to the tab. We would look at the mobile Safari plist, which has one entry for this timestamp, or Knowledge CDB, which also only has one entry for this search. Those two locations are where we would determine how many times it had been searched, as opposed to this location, which could tell us that if there were multiple entries, but there is only one. But since this is limited to just the last search that's showing in a tab, it isn't a good source to say how many times was it searched, just not this particular artifact.
But from other artifacts, you were able to determine that?
Absolutely. You can determine that from both Mobile Safari plist and Knowledge CDB. And
I'm sorry, I jumped in there just as far as turning your attention back to Figure 1. What, if anything, else of significance do you know in that?
That's really what's of significance, is that it is the same entry there multiple times, and we can tell by the unique identifier that it is the exact same entry also. And it's, although it's the same search term and the same timestamp, it's only one instance of it, just it's stored in the database multiple times at multiple offsets.
Now, from the timestamp associated with that depicted in this figure, what, if anything, can you say as to the, or what, if anything, were you able to conclude from your analysis as to the time that the website was viewed?
Well, I guess I should really clearly, for people who may not be familiar, that doesn't look like a normal time, right? That's because this is an Apple WebKit timestamp, so we actually convert it to a regular time. But when you look at this number raw, you can actually see that it's consistent throughout, even though you don't know what it is. But if we put it into a decoder, this particular timestamp is where we're getting January 29th, 2022 at 02:47 a.m. And to be clear, just for real clarity, when we actually translate this timestamp, it's in universal time constant, not in local time, but for the sake of conversationalists, I'm using the local time here as opposed to the time in the universal time constant, which is how this artifact is particularly stored.
Now, with your analysis, is there some kind of testing that you conduct, or can you explain to the jury sort of what that is and how it relates to your analysis there?
Absolutely. So with this artifact and being able to determine what this timestamp really means, I actually did quite a bit of testing, which is fun, but that's okay. So we went ahead and took a jailbroken iPhone, and the purpose of a phone being jailbroken is we're bypassing the security protocol so we can monitor the data and its storage in real time and bring the data through. We did this manually in terms of pulling the data out, and we also did multiple forensic images at different stages. We manipulated tabs, we did some Google searches, and then we would close tabs, move tabs, and perform several different searches that we scripted out first, what we were testing, and then checked to see how that timestamp was moving. We even did some really interesting things where we tried.
Sorry, objection.
Yes. Okay.
Ms. Hyde, I'm sorry. So you had, I think when you were talking about some of the testing that you had conducted, you used the term we. There are other individuals that worked on this particular assignment?
I had somebody peer review and test my testing. So they didn't work on the case, but as I was testing, one of my team members just validated that I was following my test plan. That's just normal practice that we use peer review.
So the testing that you were testifying about is testing that you...
I conducted, correct. But I had peer review by my team member on the script I had made to do my testing. So, and I use when I do testing, I'm following the NIST guidelines for data set generation and testing that's outlined by OSAC, which ironically, I should disclose I'm a co-author on.
And then If you could, I'm sorry, Ms. Hyde, just continue as far as your test.
Absolutely.
Your test.
Yeah, so then populated the device and looked at all of the different data that came back from the different states while it was jailbroken. And the changes that happened, what I was saying was interesting is then tied it to a Mac and saw how the browser state changed if we changed the browser and the tab on a Mac and how that would affect it. And because we could see the differences, and by we, I mean that I had my testing peer-reviewed, because I could see the differences of what the data looked like when I was altering it both in the Mac and on the phone, I was getting differences in those timestamps and those different conditions. So in other words, I could get a timestamp that showed in the browser state DB that was earlier than the current search by a variety of means, including manipulating the tabs, closing them, opening them, switching which one was in proper view forward, as well as looking at that tab on an external device, including a Mac and an iPad on the same account.
Now, throughout the course of your work, I think you alluded to it earlier in your testimony as far as your experience is concerned. You've had occasion to work both as a forensic, forensic extractions, forensic investigator.
Yes.
As well as working also in research and development, is that correct?
Correct.
And so from the R&D side, what, if any, role does that play as far as your analysis in general terms and your analysis here when it came to some of the devices or some of the things, the tools that you were implementing?
I believe that my experience in research, development, and reverse engineering throughout my career pertaining to artifacts, of course, influences and my analysis processes in terms of wanting to ensure I understand how things work. I think it actually gives me a better understanding in many ways of how data moves through devices, as well as how understanding why the tools parse and represent data the way they do, in terms of the fact that they are presenting the data as they parse it using the proper algorithms to dissect that data and determine what it is based on testing and knowledge. So I think it actually influences in a positive way the depth that I go through in my analysis.
You had mentioned earlier in your testimony that you had reviewed both Trippicarino's report as well as an affidavit from Mr. Green. Is that correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the affidavit from Mr. Green, what, if any, issues, of course, of significance did you observe in his analysis?
In Mr. Green's analysis, there is a conclusion that is drawn that a search occurred at 02:47 a.m. on January 29th. Based on the artifact recovered from browser state DB that Celebrite parses. And there are two errors with that. The assumption that that is the time of the search is a misunderstanding of the browser state DB artifact, because that artifact is not the time of search, it's the time of movement of the tab, as well as the statement that, that it was deleted due to the demarcation of Celebrite as recovered.
And based on the totality of your analysis, your testing, and everything that you looked at in this case, what, if any, conclusions did you come to?
My conclusion is that there was a search at 02:47 a.m. for Hawk Mock Sports. That browser was in use, and there were continual searches due through the night. The phone was, I do agree with Mr. Green's findings that the phone was in use at that time at 02:27. Later, the phone a web search is done at 6:23 a.m. For how long, at that moment, Apple produces a suggestion for how long to digest food. The search is instead completed with how long TI, die, and CKLD at 6:23. A new search is conducted at 6:24 of HOS, long to die in cold, HOS, long to die in cold. That search is then the last search that is made in that particular tab. And that's my conclusion.
What, if any, conclusion did you come to in regard to items being deleted pertaining to those artifacts you were looking at?
In regards to those artifacts pertaining to those search terms, I had no evidence of deletion.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes.
That is, digital forensics examiner Jessica Hyde. She loves her work. I started taking notes along the way, and then I lapsed into a coma. So I can't quite keep up with all of that, but I love a witness who is so into her work. I can't wait to see what happens on cross. Hey, Sunny Slaughter is here with us. She's a law enforcement instructor, and also Katherine Lizardo. She is a trial attorney. Ladies, thank you so much for joining. Important testimony. We know what the crux of this is all about. It's those darn text messages, misspelled as they might have been. Sunny, what do you think about this weird science we're hearing?
Oh, I think the expert is definitely the expert. I love the fact that she did a peer review because I have a public health background. Peer reviews are always important. But I think for the jury and for the public, there's a lot of information to consume. And I think we just need to know what time these searches were done.
Yeah,
but I know she has to explain.
Yeah.
I know she has to explain it. But we do have to get to the point. What time did this happen? Why could it happen? And whether law enforcement was correct in their assessment. So, but I think she is definitely an expert in what she does. She does love it, and she's really knowledgeable.
Yeah, Sonny, you touch on a point here. Let me ask you this, Katherine. Is it too much at times? I mean, do we need to know all of these things? She's very excited, very happy to tell you everything you ever wanted to know and didn't want to know about some of the software and some of the underlying information she used to get to her conclusions. We need the conclusions. Too much below that in the foundation?
Well, she is very excited indeed because she's very knowledgeable, and you can tell that she's an expert and she loves her job. By doing that, that comes across with great credibility for the jury. I was listening to her testimony, and I love this expert because she also tries to make it less confusing as possible for lay people like us. I'm a geek myself, so I was geeking out with her testimony, and she was able to say what are those critical testimony, like we just heard from the clip where she summed it all up, but she needed to explain all of that, how she got to her conclusion, because the cross, that's where they're going to really hone and say and question her system. Yeah,
she's so cheerful and having seemingly a great time. I really hate to break it to her. The cross exam is coming, and it ain't going to be quite as much fun. Let's take a break here. I do have some good news. We actually have the real cameras back. So if you've been missing the COVID days of Zooming everything, I'm sorry. Real cameras back in the courtroom. We will be there as well after a quick break. We'll be right back.